there's a political crisis and there's an economic crisis. And the economic crisis started before the political crisis and protests. And the economic crisis is not getting any better. And I'm not sure with things remaining the way they are. I think we're beyond the tipping point where there's any quick fix the government can do. Oussama Himani. Look, I mean, I see a lot of things online. I think there was an excellent paper that was, I think you shared it with me.
That's what I call the perfect segue.
Yes, it is. So the issue is that a lot of very hard decisions need to be made, and they're actually very, very painful decisions. And you might argue that some in the current government may have wanted to take these decisions, but couldn't because they're politically unpalatable.
Right.
And it's going to be very difficult to have, I think, from a bottom-up sort of consensus around some of these hard decisions, precisely because they're politically unpalatable.
Right.
This is a paper that I think is well written, and I have a lot of deep respect for some of the people involved in this and who I know. I think, though, there are elements there that are going to be very hard to achieve. And you see that, for example, with respect to what they talk about in terms of maintaining the peg of the Lebanese pound in the short run. The reality is you know the pound is effectively being devalued, and it's being devalued either in outright nominal terms. People won't send you dollars and cash at the official rate, or the way even merchants are now, charging differently, or charging more in Lebanese pound. In real terms, even if it is officially not happening at the official rate. The idea of capital controls is very nice. And some countries have done this well in terms of crises. When they have done it well in terms of crises, let's take the example of Malaysia during the Asian crisis. One could argue they've done it well. Chile deployed them in certain circumstances, and it worked well. The problem is that Lebanon is not about attracting, it is not subject to vast portfolio outflows. It is by foreign investors. It is largely a banking system that has the deposits of Lebanese living in Lebanon and Lebanese expatriates. And my concern with capital controls in a system like, if they're imposed, is it could do two things. One, it'll permanently damage any prospect of foreign inflows by the Lebanese diaspora again into the Lebanese banking system.
Right.
You might argue this has already happened, and given the debt crisis, they won't be sending money to Lebanon. That is conceivable, and that's one possible thing. But then there is another issue that I'm concerned about is when we're talking about government controls on something, I just worry that it opens the door for officials to then dispense with favoritism through the system, right? And now I want to step back and talk about Lebanon more generally. The fact that there is so much corruption in the country that everyone complains about exists because there's government officials have too much power and have powers that can stop you from doing certain things, right? And this is where bribery comes in. Mm-hmm. So the way to get rid of corruption is actually reduce the role of the state across the board. Uh-huh. Putting more controls and more rules, I'm not sure is going to fix the problem in the long run. It may open opportunities for other things, which I wouldn't be comfortable with. But I understand why these economists, and like I said, I think they hit all of the important points. I understand why they're putting this, because in theory you want a certain fairness. You want to capture everyone and through a haircut, and you don't want to hurt the lower income and middle income people through a devaluation of the pound. The point I'm trying to make is that it is effectively happening anyway in real terms, even if it doesn't happen officially. And so you can't defy the laws of economics forever.
But let me ask you then, if they're making this much sincere effort in putting out a policy paper, and the current political class is, and you said it, unpalatable. I mean, they're not capable, and it doesn't seem like they have it within them to start really doing the hard work anyway. Who is this policy paper for at the end? Do you think it's for a potential government down the road to sort of absorb these ideas, or is it simply just almost like a wishful thinking list?
I hope it would be for a government down the road, and a government down the road that's not in the too distant future. The longer we don't have a government and a credible set of policies, the bigger the problem becomes. The clock is ticking. It's not like something that is, we don't have months to resolve this. Right. This is the clock is ticking, and like I said, I think we're beyond the point of no return when it comes to the Lira. I don't think the Lira is viable in its current state.
Yeah. Now, this is speculation that people now, they're concerned about the actual value of the Lira. And if you were to sort of just estimate at this point now, given that we have suffered more because of the revolt, the economic situation did deteriorate further, what would your wager be on the current value of the Lira?
I think I wouldn't venture what the value is. Really, I think whatever the value should be is a function of the policies that are in place.
Interesting. Okay, so it is actually as unstable as Lebanon's government.
It is totally as unstable as Lebanon's government.
Yeah.
And you can build scenarios where it can stabilize at 2,000, and you can build scenarios where nothing is done, and it has a way to go.
Right.
So I wouldn't want to venture. It depends on the policies. The reality is that the Lebanese have already voted with their wallets. 70% of deposits are in dollars.
But that's an astounding figure. That is such a big amount anyway. So,
mind you, these are 70% of the deposits of the Lebanese residents. For non-residents, it's more like 90% are in dollars.
Sure. So basically, so long as that scenario is intact, there's no immediate meltdown, because there is such a substantial amount in dollar that even if the Lira were to sort of begin its downward spiral, that the economy does come out at least intact, that the Lira is not so central.
Yeah, but when you have capital controls, a Lira, a dollar in Lebanon is not worth the same as a dollar outside Lebanon.
Right.
So it becomes, also theoretical paper valuation. And it will buy you less prices will be higher.
Right.
You can have a devaluation of that as well.
So the myth of you're better off with dollar in Lebanon doesn't really add up to much anyway.
At this point, unless it's at this point, it's I'm afraid once it's hard to access dollars abroad, of course you have scarcity, you have difficulty for importers to pay for imports without the foreign exchange, which creates a scarcity of goods and higher prices domestically. So it is an adjustment.
But if I understood you right earlier, you said that capital controls would not be an appropriate measure for the Lebanese government.
I said that. No, let me put it differently. I think that the effect of capital controls will be a real devaluation in the currency.
Right.
Through higher prices.
Yes.
In the medium term, it will achieve the same result. And it opens another avenue of potential favoritism and the like in terms of accessing dollars. So I would rather see a market adjustment through a floating exchange rate.
Right.
You can either manage the price of money or its quantity. You can't manage both.
Right.
And while officially Lebanon is a managed float, the reality is that it was a very tight peg to the dollar.
Yes.
Which entailed both a management of the price, but also monetary policy that tried to be stimulative, that created credit in the system. When you have a hard peg, there really you have two options. You have really one option if you want to maintain that peg over the long term, and that option is to give up control of your domestic quantity of money. So you give it up completely. In a way, what Lebanon had before 1964, before the establishment of a central bank altogether, there was an era with Bank Suria or Lebanon where effectively you had a privately owned bank that was issuing the currency against certain amount of reserves deposited by the government, and currency was printed only when reserves were there, right? This is a sort of currency board-like system which Hong Kong has now. So Hong Kong Monetary Authority basically deposits dollars and has reserves, and it's HSBC and Standard Chartered and Bank of China that print the currency against certain reserves. So you have that kind of system, and this can work very well for very long periods of time. A peg like Lebanon had in the last 2 decades can only work if fiscal policy is supportive. But if you don't have a supportive fiscal policy and you have the need to create credit in the system, the peg is simply unsustainable. It's the combination is unsustainable. What is remarkable is that it lasted as long as it did.
Can I ask you, in your opinion, was this a temporary measure 2.5 decades ago when it was first implemented? Was it seen as something short-term, or was that meant to be a sort of a long-term economic policy?
I really don't know what the thinking was. I think there was some thinking at that time that an exchange rate anchor will help stabilize inflationary expectations. And remember, Lebanon did have experienced hyperinflation in the 80s.
And even
if I'm the early 90s.
Exactly. I remember it reached 3,000 Lira in the early 90s.
Yes, indeed.
Okay.
So it was about anchoring inflationary expectations, but that was Brazil did that in the 90s too, around the same time. In the mid-90s, Brazil pegged the real to the dollar for a certain period of time and then let it go.
Right.
These policies can work if they're for a short period of time and the rest of the whole economic framework supports it. So the fiscal policy needs to support it.
So in a sense, we just had a mismanaged peg.
We had a mismanaged cocktail of policies.
A mismanaged cocktail, right? So we spoke several days ago about Bosnia and their currency, the convertible mark, which, if I'm not mistaken, is still adjusted to the old Deutschmark rate as it stands against the euro. And that's been a policy now for over 2 decades.
And that exactly, but that's a currency board system.
And that's a country that doesn't have technically its own currency any longer.
That's just a currency board system and they hold reserve. There are some countries that have done away with the currencies altogether. Panama, for example, gave up and just uses the US dollar.
Within the policy document, and I mean it's available online, it'll be attached to the podcast. It's very simple. I mean there's just several steps in a sense for the government to do now, and it seems like anyone can basically get the gist of it. It's broken down into a very user-friendly manual.
It's a very user-friendly document.
The one part that stood out to me was that the signatories were staunchly against privatization, and I, as somebody who knows bare minimum about the workings of public versus privatization, and at least in government sense, my instinctual reaction is don't let the Lebanese state handle its business, because it is the least capable entity in Lebanon that has really, has done very little for infrastructure. And then I see that there's a bold call for, that this is not the right time, that the environment is wrong for privatization. And just from your side, do you think that is in a way almost a too severe approach, where putting an unnecessary burden on a government that has been more or less incompetent in recent years?
Yeah, look, I think I'm that part on privatization also made me pause, and I've heard calls against privatization coming from two schools of thought, right? One is that actually, given the crisis, the prices we will get is too low. The assets will be too cheap. We're letting go of assets at a very low price, and at the same time there is another school of thought that basically, this concept of that there is somehow a state capture in Lebanon, that there are some large business families that are so intertwined with politics that they will end up owning the assets, and you have a situation like the oligarchs in Russia.
Yeah.
Right? There is that. So what they're talking about here is that you need some sort of stronger regulatory capacity before the privatization. I don't know if it's a stronger regulatory capacity that you need or a deregulatory capacity.
Right.
But what you need is to reduce the government's reduce barrier to entries in some sectors, right? There's no reason why Lebanon has 2 mobile operators. It could be 3, it could be whatever. Government shouldn't be the ultimate owner with having licenses to 2 operators. It can be many more. Why maintain a duopoly?
So in a way, it's almost like a safety brake, that don't rush into a situation where crony capitalism could get worse. Do you think that's the motive behind sort of?
I think that's the motive behind some of it. I think there are others, and this is where I said, where I pause regarding the protests in general is you have people from both sides of the spectrum.
Yes, right.
And you have people on the left who are against privatization and on principle. And you have people on the right who think it's a very good idea. And so this paragraph is partly a compromise that reflects what I assume are the views of some of the authors.
Right.
I know some of them. I don't know all of them, but I'm sure there was a compromise here.
And this actually feeds well into the other areas of compromise, which I noticed are there's one area of social measures, and it seems like they took the safest approach here. And I saw that there's almost and there is a necessity here that the lower middle class of Lebanon is going to be paying the biggest burden after all this is over. And I wanted to just ask you, who do you think will need to, who's maybe best equipped to pay the biggest price for the situation we're in today? And this, I'm including here the haircut measures that have been discussed, of course, the interest rates that will fundamentally change. But where do you think the bulk of the money should come from, at least to offer a safety net for those that are really not equipped to handle what's about to come?
That's a very tough question to answer. Who is best equipped? There is obviously there is a view that has gained momentum that you somehow haircut the rich, or actually specifically those who made money from the unsustainably high interest rates. Right? There is that kind of view. I think that is nice theoretically, but the reality of discovering who made money how, right, is not going to be easy, and there is going to be no fair way to do this. I think the reality of haircuts will be felt across the board.
So in a way, everyone is going to be sort of sharing the burden.
I think everyone will be sharing the burden, if not simply through what haircuts that might happen to bonds, but also what happens to the value of their earnings in the country, the salaries, and the purchasing power of that, the purchasing power of the salaries.
I sense that within all of this, whether it's crony capitalism or safety measures or any privatization plans or lack of, or for that matter, no privatization, I sense that there's always an underlying lack of confidence problem, that that the economy seems to be in a fairly better state when there's simply more confidence in the way Lebanon is governed. And there's at the moment no confidence, whether it's among Lebanese or international actors. And I wanted to maybe ask your views on this because... go ahead.
What would be the positive shock?
Well,
that would minimize the cost on the population, and in particular the low earners and the middle class whose savings are in the banks, right?
Exactly, because you hear now reports of the World Bank, and France looks like it's increasingly getting involved. Do you think that the shock should come from the outside, from these well-equipped institutions that could potentially help, or do you think that's a potential problem, that it'll ensure that the corruption of the Lebanese state persists?
I think the only positive shock can come domestically, through a government that is, technocratic, apolitical, focused entirely on the economic issues. The current government, came to power elections that were, let's not kid ourselves, elections that were, free and arguably fair in a lot of ways, and we elected them. But I don't recall many discussions of policy priorities in that campaign, right? It was a campaign about personalities of individuals. I actually don't know any differences in fiscal policy priorities of one party over another in Lebanon. I don't know, maybe you...
It's rather shocking that it's the central issue and it's the least discussed one.
Indeed. So we have this absence. We actually don't know. But what we need are experts now, because also the population didn't express a view on these priorities in an election, right?
That's true, yeah.
We expressed a view on personalities, but not on policy priorities. So you need some, if you do have a technocratic government that can then seek the assistance of an IMF that will help catalyze, other financing sources, then that could be exactly the positive shock that the country needs. That would minimize the costs on lower income and middle income families.
So in a way, it's up to Lebanese to continue pressuring their leadership here to in a way be held to account and keep pushing against them, so that if and when there is external support, it is through the right mechanisms, that it doesn't simply get into the same quagmire that other attempts have unfortunately led to.
Indeed, absolutely. Lebanon's problem is homegrown, and it needs a homegrown solution in terms of a government. I think the stamp of approval and the experience of organizations like the IMF can be really big help, and will help balance a lot of things now, and the worst kind of support Lebanon can get would be unconditional support from, say, as has happened in the past, from the Gulf countries, right? That policy, financing without conditionality on economic policies would be a pretty bad outcome.
Yeah.
Because it will simply kick the can down the road. I think we have an exciting moment for the country, an important moment. Unfortunately, it's not going to be an easy moment, but there's a glimmer of hope that things can move in actually a direction that is sustainable for the first time in a long time.
I think it is one of those rare occasions where every generation in Lebanon, and this includes, of course, the diaspora, all segments of Lebanese society, are all demanding change, and it's a lining up of circumstances that have allowed people to, in a way, expect more for the first time. Because I only hope that our expectations are not higher than an international body's efforts, that we are not disappointed at the end. Because it is like you said, there is optimism and there is hope, and I personally hope that it's sustainable and that it translates into proper reform. And I appreciate your views from abroad. I know you're in London at the moment, looking at this from afar, but I do appreciate people that are involved and passionate about this country. They care about it. They're not here right now, but they want a better Lebanon as well. So.
I'm there often. I go often, and it's always a pleasure to talk to you. We're at a point where, the costs of the consequences of the last years of economic policies will become more apparent, and these costs will fuel the anger, and maintain the level of anger. So I don't really see it going away. That said, I am a bit cautious, and I'm cautious because it's great to see the Lebanese having a consensus over something, but this consensus is about what they don't want. I'm not sure I see a consensus about what they want, and being against something is not like being for something. So you can reject a certain set of policies, you can reject all of the politicians, but how you put things back together